The stale bread roll had the aerodynamic properties of a small, lumpy brick. Alpha King Ronan saw it coming in exquisite slow motion. His preternatural senses, honed over 3 centuries of unchallenged dominance, tracked its clumsy arc from the furious woman in the crowd below to its inevitable destination, the space directly between his eyes. His human mind, the part that ran a kingdom and negotiated treaties, had a fleeting, dignified thought. I should move. His wolf, however, had other ideas. The beast that slumbered within him, the one whispered about in terrified legends, the one that could level a forest with a roar, woke up, took one look at the woman flinging baked goods with the righteous fury of a minor goddess, and fell head over paws in love. She brings us a tribute, the wolf howled in his mind, its tail thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A warrior queen, providing for her alpha. She is magnificent. Do not dodge the blessed carb. So Ronan stood there, frozen by the sheer, idiotic adoration of his own inner animal, and let the bread roll bounce squarely off his forehead. It made a surprisingly dull thud. A single poppy seed dislodged and stuck to his eyebrow. For a moment, the entire capital square went silent. Then a titter. Then a wave of muffled laughter. Ronan, the shadow wolf, the king of the north, had been assaulted by a pastry. His dignity, a carefully constructed fortress of brooding silence and imposing glares, crumbled into dust. Internally, his wolf was doing backflips. She has marked us! Before the entire pack! Such a bold declaration. We must accept her immediately. Let us go down there and nuzzle her. We will do no such thing, Ronan projected back, his mental voice a low, dangerous growl that had made lesser alphas wet themselves. His wolf just wagged its tail harder. But she smells like righteous anger and yeast. It is the scent of our future. Ronan pressed his fingers to his temple, where the roll had made impact. He could already feel the skin beginning to bruise. Below, the woman, her hair a wild tangle of brown, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes blazing with a fire that had nothing to do with supernatural abilities and everything to do with sheer, unadulterated annoyance, had her hands on her hips. She wasn't laughing. She was glaring, as if disappointed the roll hadn't hit harder. "And another thing, Your Majesty," she yelled, her voice carrying across the now hushed square. "These grain taxes are pricing bread out of the mouths of the very people who harvest the wheat. It is fundamentally unjust." His wolf purred. It was a low, rattling sound deep in his chest, a sound usually reserved for moments of profound contentment, like after a successful hunt or during a long nap in a sunbeam. He coughed to cover it, a harsh, barking sound that did not sound kingly at all. "The royal tariffs are set by the council, based on centuries of precedent," he managed to call down, his voice tight. He was trying for imperious and dismissive. He landed somewhere closer to constipated and surprised. "Listen to her voice," his wolf crooned. "It rings with the truth of the mountain stone. Let us give her all the grain. Let us give her the treasury. Let us give her our favorite chew toy." "We don't have a chew toy," Ronan thought, exasperated. "We could get one. For her." From his side, his beta, Kale, leaned in. Kale had served him for 50 years, and had the perpetually exhausted expression of a man who had seen far too much. "My king," he murmured, his voice laced with a familiar, weary sarcasm. "Are you all right? That was a particularly aggressive roll. Shall I have the royal guard arrest the baker?" "No, Kale," Ronan ground out. He could feel his eyes starting to flash gold, a dead giveaway that his wolf was close to the surface. He clenched his fists, forcing the human amber to reassert itself. "Just handle the crowd." "And the woman?" Kale asked, a glint of amusement in his tired eyes. "The one who has apparently declared war via baked goods?" "She is a citizen expressing a grievance," Ronan said stiffly, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. What he wanted to say was, "She is my mate, and my wolf is currently planning our wedding, and I may need to go lie down for an hour. See to it that her petition is filed through the usual channels." Kale bowed, a gesture that managed to be both respectful and deeply mocking. "As you command, Your Majesty. I will be sure to file the petition from the lady with the arm of a catapult and the soul of a revolutionary. Any other descriptors?" Ronan shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Just do it, Kale." As Kale moved to disperse the crowd, Ronan allowed himself one last look at the woman. She was still arguing with a guard, jabbing a finger at his chest plate. She was magnificent. She was infuriating. She was, according to the drooling idiot that was his inner wolf, his destiny. The poppy seed on his eyebrow itched. He resisted the urge to scratch it. Kings did not scratch. They endured. But as he turned to retreat into the cold stone of his palace, his wolf sent one last plaintive thought. "Can we at least keep the bread?" Ronan swept back into his throne room, the heavy doors booming shut behind him. He stalked to the window, ignoring the concerned looks from the courtiers who scurried out of his path. He was the Alpha King. His bloodline was the oldest, his power absolute. He had stared down rogue pacts, negotiated with ancient fae, and even endured his mother's attempts to marry him off to every simpering alpha daughter in the territory. Yet he had been completely undone by a 5'4" human with a well-aimed breakfast item. This was, objectively, a disaster. Wren dusted her hands off, a gesture of finality. The guard, a young wolf whose eyes were still wide with the shock of seeing the king get pelted, finally scampered away with her hastily scribbled petition. "And make sure he actually reads it," she yelled after him. Her best friend, Ilara, appeared at her elbow, holding out a water skin. "Wren, I love you like a sister, but one of these days you're going to get yourself thrown in the dungeon for assault with a deadly carbohydrate." "It was a stale roll, Ilara, not a trebuchet," Wren muttered, taking a long drink. "And did you see his face? He just stood there, like a statue. A big, brooding, ridiculously well-dressed statue." Her internal monologue, a constant companion that was far more sarcastic than she ever dared to be out loud, chimed in. "A statue that probably pays more for his boots than my entire village earns in a year. Of course he doesn't care about grain taxes." "He looked more surprised than angry," Ilara noted, her head tilted. "And did you hear that weird coughing fit? It sounded like a bear choking on a beehive." "Probably choked on his own self-importance," Wren grumbled, scanning the dissipating crowd. Most people were scurrying away, not wanting to be associated with the woman who'd attacked the king. A few gave her furtive, approving nods. It was enough. It had to be. The drought was entering its third month. The river that fed their village of Oakhaven was a muddy trickle. The wells were low, and the king's reserves, vast stores of water and grain held within the mountain behind the palace, remained sealed. Tradition, they said. For emergencies only. Wren wanted to scream. What exactly did they think this was? A minor inconvenience? The elders in Oakhaven were starting to ration water to the children. That wasn't an inconvenience. It was a crisis. And the king, with his silken banners and his perfectly tailored tunics, just stood on his balcony and looked broody. It was his primary job description, as far as she could tell. That evening, the news came back via the village's unofficial gossip network, which was faster and more reliable than the king's own messengers. Petition denied. Wren's hands clenched into fists. On what grounds? She demanded of Old Man Hemlock, who had heard it from his cousin who worked in the palace kitchens. The Council of Elders, Hemlock rasped, spitting a wad of tobacco juice near a wilting petunia. Declared the reserves can only be opened in the event of war or a blighted winter. A simple drought, they say, does not meet the criteria of the ancient laws. A simple drought? Wren's voice was dangerously quiet. Tell that to Maris, whose daughter has a fever and can't be properly cooled. Tell that to the Fletcher family, whose well just ran dry this morning. She looked around at the worried faces of her fellow villagers, gathered in the dusty square. Desperation was a thin, sharp taste in the air. Anger was a hot coal in her stomach. Fine, if the king and his stuffy council wouldn't act, she would. The next day, she organized the protest. It wasn't a mob with pitchforks. It was mothers holding empty water buckets. It was farmers with withered saplings. It was Wren, standing on a crate, her voice raw but clear. "We are not begging for charity," she cried, her voice echoing off the palace walls. "We are demanding what is just. The water in that mountain belongs to the land, not to a council of dusty old wolves who haven't known a day of thirst in their lives." She was halfway through a particularly fiery point about resource allocation when he appeared. The Alpha King. He didn't come to the balcony this time. He walked out the main gates, flanked by Kale and a dozen of his elite guards. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with tension. Ronan stopped about 20 feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing black leather that probably cost a fortune and a scowl that was meant to be terrifying. Wren's inner voice was unimpressed. "Oh look, Lord Gloomypants has graced us with his presence. He's probably going to lecture us on the importance of proper protest permits." His eyes found hers across the space. They were a startling amber, and for a split second, she thought she saw them glow, shifting to a molten gold before returning to normal. He thought he was intimidating her. The anger in her chest burned away the fear. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice dripping with mock respect. "So glad you could join us. Perhaps you'd like to say a few words to the people you're allowing to go thirsty." He didn't say anything. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. But behind the mask, Ronan was in agony. Every word she spoke was a love song to his wolf. "She is defending the pack, our pack," it howled with pride. "Look at her fire. She is the sun. We must help her." He was trying so hard to project an aura of absolute authority, of untouchable power. But all his wolf wanted to do was run over, knock her over with affection, and lick her face. The result was a bizarre internal tug-of-war that left him looking constipated and mildly menacing. His eyes had flashed gold. He knew she'd seen it. He prayed to the moon goddess she'd interpret it as kingly rage, and not what it was, his wolf getting heart eyes. He had to end this. He had to assert control. He cleared his throat. "The decision of the council is final," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was the right thing to say for the kingdom. It was the wrong thing to say to her. The look of betrayal and fury on her face was a physical blow, and his stupid, traitorous wolf whimpered. Ronan strode through the halls of the palace, Kale a half-step behind him. The protest had dispersed, but the woman's furious, disappointed face was seared into his mind. His wolf was pacing frantically inside him, whining and scratching at the walls of his consciousness. "We hurt her. We made the Sun Woman sad. We are terrible alphas, the worst alphas. We don't deserve the good chew toy." "Will you shut up?" Ronan muttered under his breath. "My king?" Kale asked, his eyebrow raised. "Nothing," Ronan snapped, shoving open the doors to the council chamber. "Just preparing." The council of elders was already assembled. 12 ancient werewolves, their faces maps of wrinkles and self-importance, sat around a massive stone table. They were the living embodiment of bureaucracy, the guardians of traditions so old no one remembered why they existed in the first place. At their head sat Elder Tiberius, whose fur had been silver for a century and whose opinions had fossilized shortly thereafter. "Alpha King Ronan," Tiberius said, his voice like stones grinding together. "We trust you have dealt with the disturbance." "I have reiterated the council's decision," Ronan said, taking his seat at the head of the table. His chair was larger and more ornate, but today it felt like a cage. "Good," Tiberius nodded. "The ancient laws are clear. The reserves are sacrosanct. To open them for a common drought would set a dangerous precedent." The people are suffering, Ronan stated, keeping his voice level. Let them pray for rain, another elder, Lyra, sniffed. The moon goddess provides for the faithful. Ronan resisted the urge to point out that the moon goddess hadn't provided a drop in 3 months, and seemed more interested in celestial mechanics than terrestrial hydration. A low growl rumbled in Ronan's chest before he could stop it. It wasn't loud, but in the silent chamber it was a thunderclap. Every head turned to him. Tiberius narrowed his gaze. They deny our people water, his wolf snarled. They sit on their dusty haunches and let the pack starve. We should— Ronan forced the wolf down, swallowing the growl with effort that made his jaw ache. Forgive me, he said, his voice dangerously smooth. A stray thought. Tiberius watched him a moment too long, then continued. The point is, the decision is made. The reserves remain sealed. Ronan hated himself for saying nothing more. He hated the smug look on Tiberius's face. But the council held the keys, both literally and politically. The ancient laws were magically bound. He couldn't open the reserves without their unanimous consent, and they would rather turn to dust than bend a rule. He was the Alpha King, but he was trapped by the very traditions that gave him power. He left the meeting feeling hollowed out. Kale was waiting for him in the hall. That went well, the beta said, his tone bone dry. You managed to alienate your people and empower the fossils on the council, all in the space of 10 minutes. A new record, I believe. It's not funny, Kale, Ronan growled. No, it's not, Kale agreed, his expression sobering. They're boxing you in, Ronan. Tiberius is using this to consolidate his own power. I know. Ronan ran a hand through his hair. And that woman, Ren, she thinks I'm a tyrant. Well, Kale said, choosing his words carefully. From her perspective, you did just stand there looking menacing while telling her entire village to go dehydrate. The optics aren't great. Ronan's wolf whimpered again, a pathetic sound. She thinks we are a monster. Ronan's own heart twisted. He had a reputation to uphold, a kingdom to run, a council to manage. But all he could think about was the fire in her eyes, and how he had been the one to extinguish it. He had made the politically necessary choice, the choice of a king, and it felt exactly like a betrayal. He was supposed to be her mate. He was supposed to protect her. Instead, he had become the villain in her story. And the worst part was, he couldn't even blame her for hating him. Ren stared at the dusty, cracked earth of her family's plot of land. The tomato vines were withered skeletons. The soil was like concrete. Denied. The word echoed in her head, a dull, throbbing drumbeat of failure. She had faced down the Alpha King, and she had lost. Oakhaven was on its own. So what now? Alara asked softly, sitting beside her on the porch steps. Do we pray for rain? Ren didn't answer for a long moment. She traced a crack in the wooden step with her finger. Pray? She'd done that. Hope? That was a luxury they couldn't afford. Anger had gotten her a public refusal. Desperation was just a slow death. No. She needed something else. She needed a plan. Her mind, which usually supplied an endless stream of sarcastic commentary, went quiet. It started to churn, to connect disparate pieces of information. The old stories her grandfather used to tell about the Whisperwood, the way the mist always clung to the base of the Greyfang Peak, even on the hottest days, the discarded half-finished schematics she'd seen in the village records office, plans for an aqueduct from a century ago, abandoned because the river had been plentiful. No, Ren said, her voice quiet but firm. She stood up. We don't pray, we work. That night she didn't sleep. She dug out the old schematics, blowing a thick layer of dust off the brittle parchment. The ink was faded, the notes written in a spidery hand. The plan was ambitious, bordering on insane. It proposed building a stone-lined channel all the way from the high mountain springs, the ones that fed the Whisperwood, down the valley and into Oakhaven's reservoir. It had been abandoned because it was deemed too costly, too labor-intensive. The original engineer had been called a dreamer. Ren looked at the plans, and for the first time in days, she felt a spark of something other than anger. She felt a flicker of furious, defiant hope. The next morning, she stood on the crate in the village square again. She wasn't shouting this time. She held up the old parchment. "The king won't help us," she said, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "The council won't help us. So we will help ourselves. There is water in the Greyfang Mountains, enough for all of us. The old plans show us how to get it." She laid out the schematics on the ground. "It will be hard work. It will be backbreaking. It might not even work. But I would rather die with a shovel in my hand trying to save us than die of thirst waiting for a king to notice we exist." Silence. The villagers looked at each other, at the plans, at Ren's determined face. It was a crazy idea. It was impossible. Then the blacksmith, a man-mountain named Torvin, stepped forward. He picked up a spare shovel leaning against a wall. "My grandfather worked on the first attempt," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He said it was the proudest he'd ever been. I'll not let his work be for nothing." That was all it took. One by one, others stepped forward. Farmers, weavers, carpenters, mothers. They grabbed shovels, picks, buckets. Ilara grinned, grabbing a pickaxe that was almost as big as she was. "You're going to build a river? By yourself?" she'd asked yesterday. Now she looked at Ren and said, "All right, let's go build a river." The work was brutal. The sun beat down on them. The ground was rocky and unforgiving. They started at the base of the mountain, clearing the path, digging the initial trench. Ren worked harder than anyone. She dug until her hands were raw and blistered, then wrapped them in rags and kept digging. She hauled rocks until her muscles screamed in protest. She was fueled by a cold, hard rage and the image of Maris's sick daughter. Every shovelful of dirt was an act of defiance. Every rock she moved was a vote of no confidence in the Alpha King. She wasn't just building an aqueduct. She was building a monument to his failure. Days blurred into a cycle of sweat, dirt, and aching limbs. But the trench grew. Slowly, painstakingly, it snaked its way down the valley. They were doing it. They were actually doing it. And Ren, covered in mud, her hair matted with sweat, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache, had never felt more alive. Ronan's royal engineers were in a state of quiet panic. The chief engineer, a portly wolf named Master Valerius, stood before the king's tactical map, his face pale. "Your Majesty," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at a spot miles outside the capital. It's remarkable." "What is remarkable, Valerius?" Ronan asked, not looking up from the trade agreement he was reviewing. His wolf had been sulking for 3 days, refusing to do anything but project feelings of deep melancholy and occasionally replay the bread-throwing incident like a cherished memory. "The Oakhaven Project," Valerius said, "the civilian-led water diversion initiative." Ronan looked up. "You mean the ditch the woman is digging?" "It's not a ditch, Your Majesty," Valerius squeaked, offended on behalf of his craft. "It's a gravity-fed aqueduct, and the gradient it's perfect. The structural bracings they're improvising with local timber are surprisingly sound. The projected flow rate, it's actually viable. It's brilliant. It shames my last 3 municipal projects." Ronan stood and walked to the map. He looked at the line the engineer had drawn, showing the progress of Ren's project. It was a long, determined scar on the landscape, heading directly for the mountain spring. She was actually doing it. His wolf, which had been metaphorically lying in a dark room listening to sad music, sat up. "Our mate is a genius," it declared, its mood swinging from despair to adoration in a nanosecond. "An engineering prodigy. Of course she is. She will build us a glorious den." "She is going to kill herself," Ronan said, his voice flat. The reports he'd been getting from his scouts were clinical. 14-hour workdays, minimal food, refusing to rest. He felt a cold knot of fear in his gut. It was one thing for her to be angry at him. It was another for her to work herself to death out of sheer spite. "The project is sound," Cale observed, stepping into the room. "The morale in Oakhaven is the highest it's been in a decade. They've stopped petitioning. They're simply solving their own problem. And making me look like an incompetent tyrant in the process," Ronan finished. "The optics remain suboptimal," Cale agreed. Ronan stared at the map. He couldn't send aid. His council would block it, calling it an endorsement of rebellion. He couldn't order her to stop. She'd likely hit him with a shovel this time. He was the most powerful being in the kingdom, and he was completely powerless. His wolf, however, did not care about politics. "We must go to her. We will help her dig. We are very good at digging. We will dig the best holes. She will be so impressed." For once, the wolf's idiotic idea didn't seem so idiotic. It was absurd. It was undignified. It was political suicide. It was perfect. "Cale," Ronan said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Ready my guard, and pack some work gloves." Cale stared at him. "My king, what are you planning?" "I am going to inspect a public works project," Ronan said, his eyes glinting, "as is my duty as king." The arrival of the Alpha King and 50 of his royal guard was not subtle. They came on horseback, their armor gleaming, their banners snapping in the hot breeze. They looked less like a construction crew and more like an invading army. They stopped at the edge of the massive, sprawling worksite, where hundreds of villagers were toiling in the sun. And there, in the middle of it all, was Wren. She was covered head to toe in mud, a stray leaf stuck in her tangled hair. She was arguing with Torvin the blacksmith over the placement of a support beam, her voice sharp and commanding. She looked exhausted, fierce, and absolutely breathtaking. Ronan dismounted, his pristine black boots sinking slightly into the churned-up earth. He strode forward, the villagers falling silent and backing away as he approached. All except Wren. She simply put her hands on her hips, her expression of weary annoyance not changing one bit. He stopped before her, acutely aware of the mud splattering the hem of his cloak. He had prepared a speech, something about royal oversight and ensuring public safety. He opened his mouth to deliver it. Wren didn't give him the chance. She looked him up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that took in his polished armor, his clean hands, and his regal posture. Then she looked at the simple, sturdy shovel in her own hand. Without a word, she held it out to him, handle first. It was not a request. It was a challenge. A dare. His royal guard gasped. Cale, standing behind him, made a sound suspiciously like a choked laugh. Ronan looked at the shovel. It was caked in mud and worn smooth from use. He looked at her face. Her eyes were daring him. "Take it," his wolf screamed with glee. "We will be a team. We will conquer the dirt together." Ronan's carefully planned speech evaporated. He reached out, his gloved hand closing around the wooden handle. He took the shovel. Wren gave a single sharp nod, as if to say, "About time." Then she turned her back on him and picked up a pickaxe. "Well, don't just stand there, Your Majesty," she called over her shoulder. "That ditch won't dig itself." Ronan stood there for a moment, the king of the north, holding a common shovel, utterly bewildered. His wolf had never been happier. Wren watched him out of the corner of her eye. She had expected him to posture, to give a speech, to order them all to stop. She had not, in her wildest, most delirious imaginings, expected him to actually take the shovel. And yet, there he was. The Alpha King, in his 1,000 gold coin outfit, looking at a pile of dirt as if it were a complex political treaty he was about to negotiate. Her internal monologue was having a field day. Well, look at that. He knows which end to hold. I'm genuinely impressed. Now let's see if he knows what to do with it. He jammed the shovel into the earth. It was a clumsy, awkward movement, more suited to stabbing an enemy than digging. The shovel head hit a rock with a jarring clang. He winced. A few of the younger villagers snickered before their parents shushed them. Ren felt a tiny, unwelcome pang of something. It wasn't pity, more like secondhand embarrassment. "You have to angle it," she said, not turning around. "Use your body weight, not just your arms. It's not a sword." She heard a grunt of effort from behind her. She risked a glance. He had adjusted his stance, bending his knees. He drove the shovel into the dirt again. This time it sank in. He lifted a respectable amount of earth and tossed it onto the growing pile. He was a fast learner. Annoyingly fast. His 50 guards stood in a perfect, useless line, watching their king perform manual labor. They looked deeply uncomfortable, as if the world had tilted on its axis. "Are they just going to stand there and look pretty?" Ren called out to Kale, who was observing the scene with an air of profound resignation. "They're the royal guard," Kale called back. "Their duties primarily involve looking pretty and, on occasion, stabbing people. Shoveling is not in their job description." "Well, it's in their job description now," Ren retorted. "Grab a shovel or get out of the way. We're on a schedule." To her utter astonishment, Kale sighed, walked over to their supply pile, and picked up a shovel. He passed others to the bewildered guards. Within minutes, the most elite fighting force in the kingdom was awkwardly digging a ditch, their polished armor getting spattered with mud. The villagers stared, then slowly, a few smiles broke out. The tension that had arrived with the king began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of shared, surreal purpose. Ren went back to her work, trying to ignore the very large, very royal presence digging a few feet away from her. But it was impossible. She was acutely aware of him. The sound of his breathing, the rhythmic scrape of his shovel, the low curse he muttered when a rock flew up and hit him in the shin. At one point, she was struggling to pry a large, embedded boulder out of the trench path. Torvin was busy on the other side, and she was determined to do it herself. She had her pickaxe wedged underneath it, putting all her weight into it, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. Ronan was there, his shovel discarded. "Allow me," he said, his voice a low rumble next to her ear. Before she could protest, he knelt, wrapped his arms around the boulder, and stood. The muscles in his back and arms corded under his tunic. With a grunt of effort that was pure primal strength, he lifted the massive rock and heaved it out of the trench. It landed with a heavy thud that shook the ground. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his hands on his knees. Ren stared. That rock had to weigh 300 pounds. She and Torvin together would have struggled with it. He straightened up, catching her staring. A faint flush appeared on his high cheekbones. "It was in the way," he mumbled, as if apologizing for the display of raw, supernatural power. Ren's brain, usually so quick with a sarcastic retort, came up empty. "Okay, that was something," her inner voice admitted, sounding slightly dazed. "Right," she managed to say, her own voice a little breathless. "Thanks." They were standing close. Too close. She could smell the scent of rain and old stone that seemed to cling to him, now mixed with the honest scent of sweat and earth. It wasn't unpleasant. It was distracting. Their hands brushed as she reached for her pickaxe. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up her arm. She flinched back. He froze, his amber eyes widening slightly. The air crackled. The moment stretched, thick and strange. Then, a loud splash and a curse shattered the tension. One of the younger guards had slipped and fallen face first into a muddy puddle. The worksite erupted in laughter, and just like that, the spell was broken. Ren snatched her pickaxe and practically ran to a different section of the trench, her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she refused to analyze. She was starting to see the man beneath the crown, the awkward, powerful, confusing man. And that was far more dangerous than any tyrant. For the next week, a bizarre new reality settled over the valley. Every morning, the Alpha King and his royal guard would arrive. Not on horseback anymore, but on foot, their armor replaced with practical leather tunics. They would pick up their shovels and get to work alongside the villagers of Oakhaven. The hierarchy had vanished, replaced by the simple democracy of the ditch. Your worth was measured not by your title, but by how much earth you could move. And Ronan, to Ren's constant, simmering annoyance, was a terrifyingly efficient worker. Once he got the hang of it, his supernatural strength and stamina made him worth 5 men. He never complained, he never gave orders, he just worked. He worked until his hands, no longer protected by gloves he'd discarded as impractical, were blistered and raw just like hers. He worked until his face was streaked with dirt and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. He looked less like a king and more like a farmer. A very, very large and intense farmer. The arguments stopped. Ren was too tired to yell, and he seemed content to follow her lead. She'd point to a section of the trench that needed deepening, and he would nod and get to it. She'd explain a bracing technique, and he would listen with a focused intensity that was more unnerving than any of his previous scowls. The silence was louder than their shouting had ever been. Ronan felt it like a missing limb. He had grown accustomed to her fiery retorts, the way her eyes flashed when she was making a point, the sheer force of her personality. He had provoked her, in part, just to see it. Now there was just quiet competence, and it scared him more than any rebellion. His wolf, however, was in heaven. "We are building our den together," it sang, every time he and Ren worked in tandem to lift a heavy stone. "This is the ultimate courtship ritual. She is testing our worth as a provider of superior ditches. We are excelling." One afternoon, the heat was particularly oppressive. Everyone had stopped for a brief rest in the shade, passing around water skins. Ren was sitting on a rock, sketching a modification to the sluice gate design on a piece of slate. Ronan approached her cautiously, holding out a water skin. "You haven't had anything to drink in hours," he said. His voice was rough, tired. She looked up, surprised. She hadn't even realized he was there. She took the water skin, her fingers brushing his. That same jolt. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. His eyes held hers. They weren't kingly or intimidating. They were just tired and worried about her. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She took a long drink, the cool water a blessing on her parched throat. He sat down on the rock next to her, not too close, but not far away either. They sat in silence for a minute, watching the others. The villagers were mingling with the guards, sharing jokes. Torvin was showing a guard how to properly sharpen a shovel head. It was a scene she never could have imagined. "They don't hate you anymore," Ren observed quietly. Ronan looked out at the mingled group. "No," he said. "Now they just think their king is an eccentric ditch digger." "There are worse things for a king to be," she said, and she meant it. She glanced at him. A genuine, tired smile touched her lips. It wasn't a triumphant smirk or a sarcastic grin. It was small and real, and it lit up her whole face. "We're actually going to do this," she said, a note of wonder in her own voice. "We're going to make it work." For Ronan, that small, genuine smile was a cataclysm. It was more powerful than a declaration of war, more stunning than a solar eclipse. It was the sun breaking through the clouds after a long winter. It was a promise. It was everything. His human mind short-circuited. His carefully constructed control, built over centuries, didn't just crack. It fractured into a million pieces. And the wolf, the great, ancient, lovesick beast within him, could not be contained for 1 second longer. A sound ripped from his throat, a sound he had no power to stop. It wasn't a word. It was a howl. A loud, clear, ringing howl of pure, unadulterated joy and adoration. It echoed off the mountainside, rolled down the valley, and carried across the plains. Every head at the worksite snapped toward him. Birds burst from the trees. In the distance, a dog barked in reply. The howl faded, leaving a ringing, profound silence in its wake. Wren was staring at him, her eyes wide with shock, her smile frozen on her face. Ronan's face, already flushed from the heat, turned a shade of crimson that was truly spectacular. He had just howled, like a dog, like a lovesick puppy, in front of his entire royal guard and the woman he was desperately trying to impress by pretending to be a normal, functional person. Kale, who had been enjoying a rare moment of peace, slowly and deliberately put his face in his hands. Ronan wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. His wolf, entirely unrepentant, simply thought, "Finally, now she knows we are serious." The howl, as it immediately became known, was the single most scandalous and talked-about event in the kingdom's recent history. The pack's gossip network, a terrifyingly efficient entity that operated with the speed of thought and the accuracy of a drunken bard, went into overdrive. By nightfall, every wolf, from the highest-born alpha to the lowliest omega stablehand, knew that the Alpha King had howled at a human commoner in the middle of the day. Interpretations varied wildly. Some said it was a declaration of war. Some said it was a sign of madness. The Romantics, a small but vocal minority, whispered that it was a howl of mating, a sound not heard in the kingdom for 100 years. Wren just thought he was having some sort of breakdown. After the howl, Ronan had mumbled something about a sudden coughing fit of the wolf variety, and had practically fled the scene, his guards scrambling to follow him, their faces a mixture of horror and confusion. Kale had simply given Wren a look that conveyed a universe of apology and exhaustion before trailing after his king. Now the worksite was buzzing. People kept giving Wren strange, speculative looks. Ilara cornered her by the water barrels. "Okay," she said, her eyes wide. "I'm going to need you to explain what that was. Do Alpha Kings normally howl at people? Is that a thing? Because it felt significant." "He said it was a cough," Wren said, a little too quickly. "A very loud, very weird, very wolfy cough." "It wasn't a cough," her inner voice said, sounding unnerved for the first time. "That was the sound of a man losing his entire mind over you. This has gone from civic project to deeply weird romantic drama, and you are not equipped for this." She wasn't. She was good at logistics, at anger, at getting things done. She was not good at whatever this was. The howl had rattled something deep inside her, a place she kept locked away. It was a sound of such raw, unguarded emotion. It was terrifying. But what terrified her more was the part of her that had responded to it, the part that had felt the howl vibrate through her chest and settle somewhere warm and inconvenient. The part that had looked at the Alpha King's mortified face and thought, not, "What a lunatic," but, "Oh no, he means it." She couldn't afford to mean it back. She was Wren. She dug ditches and yelled at kings and solved problems with her hands. She didn't fall for people. People fell for you, and then they left, or they disappointed you, or they stood on a balcony and told your village to go thirsty. Her father had been like that. Big promises, warm eyes, gone before the first frost. She didn't trust warmth. She trusted work. That night, she sat on the porch of her family's cottage, alone. The stars were brilliant overhead, indifferent to the drought, indifferent to her confusion. She pressed her palms against her eyes. Ilara found her there, as Ilara always did. "You're doing that thing," Ilara said, sitting down. "That thing where you turn something over and over in your head until it's smooth as a river stone and twice as hard." "I don't do that." "You absolutely do that. You did it when your father left. You did it when Old Man Hemlock's roof caved in and you decided to fix it yourself instead of asking for help. You do it every time something scares you." Ilara paused. "He scares you," He doesn't scare me, Wren said. I threw bread at his face. That's not the kind of scary I mean, and you know it. Silence. The crickets sang their dry, rasping song. He's the king, Ilara, Wren said, and her voice was small in a way she hated. He stood on that balcony and said no. He watched our wells go dry and he said the decision of the council is final. And now he shows up with a shovel and lifts boulders and looks at me like… She swallowed. Like I matter. And I can't afford to believe it. Because when this is done, when the aqueduct is finished and the crisis is over, he goes back to his palace and I go back to my dirt plot. And I'll have let myself hope. And hope is just a fancy word for setting yourself up to be devastated. Ilara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, or maybe hope is a fancy word for being brave enough to want something. Wren didn't answer. But she didn't sleep that night either, and the thing she turned over and over in her head wasn't smooth at all. It was jagged and complicated, and it had amber eyes. The fallout in the capital was immediate and severe. Elder Tiberius summoned an emergency council meeting. When Ronan and a mud-caked Kale returned to the palace, the council was waiting for him, their faces like thunderclouds. A howl, Tiberius boomed, foregoing any pleasantries. In broad daylight, at a dirt-covered commoner. Have you lost your senses, Ronan? You have disgraced your title. You have made a mockery of this kingdom. It was an involuntary vocalization, Ronan said weakly. He knew how it sounded. His wolf, smug and proud, offered no help. Tell them she is our mate. They will understand. Involuntary vocalizations do not echo across 3 valleys, an elder shrieked. Tiberius rose from his seat, his silver mane bristling with authority. This fraternization ends now. You are forbidden from returning to that ditch. And we will be posting a royal decree declaring the project unsanctioned and illegal. Any who continue to work on it will be charged with treason. The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. This was their move. They weren't just trying to control him. They were trying to crush Wren and Oakhaven, to make an example of them. You can't, Ronan said, his voice a low growl. This time it was intentional. His eyes bled to gold. Treason? For trying to survive? The law is the law, Tiberius said, unflinching. And the law says that any unsanctioned diversion of a natural water source of that magnitude is an act against the kingdom. We have you, boy. Either you fall in line, or your little pet project gets shut down, and your pet commoner gets thrown in a cell. Ronan felt a fury so cold and pure it burned. They had him cornered. If he defied them, Wren would pay the price. His wolf paced, snarling. They threaten our mate. We must end them. For the first time, Ronan agreed, but not with brute force. He had to be smarter. He looked at the smug faces of the elders. They thought they had won. Back at the worksite, a royal messenger arrived, his face pale. He nailed a decree to a tree, the king's seal gleaming at the bottom. Treason. The word was a death knell. The villagers looked at each other, fear replacing the hope that had filled the past week. Their shovel suddenly felt heavy, dangerous. Wren read the words, and a cold dread washed over her. It wasn't the threat to herself that scared her. It was the threat to her people, who had trusted her, who had followed her. She had led them into this. She had led them to a charge of treason. As the sun began to set, people started to pack their tools, their shoulders slumped in defeat. The laughter was gone. The energy was gone. The aqueduct, so close to being finished, was now a symbol of their failure. Wren stood alone by the half-finished channel, watching her people file away into the dusk. She didn't cry. She was too hollowed out for tears. She just stood there, one hand resting on the smooth stone they'd placed that morning, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest like a burial stone. This is what hope gets you, her inner voice said, but it was tired now, not sarcastic. Just sad. That night, Ilara found her still there, sitting in the empty trench with her back against the wall they'd built, staring at the stars. "Come inside," Alara said softly. "You'll catch cold." "I led them here," Wren whispered. "Every single one of them. Torvin, Maris, the Fletcher kids who carried buckets. I stood on a crate and told them I'd save them, and instead, I've made them criminals." "You gave them something to believe in." "Belief doesn't hold up in a dungeon, Alara." Alara sat down in the trench beside her. For a while they just sat in the dirt, two women in the dark. "What will you do?" Alara asked finally. Wren shook her head. "I don't know," she paused. "But I know what I won't do. I won't let them be punished for my fight." The next morning the worksite was silent and empty. The half-finished aqueduct looked like a wound in the earth. The royal decree, stark and official, fluttered in the breeze. Wren arrived at dawn, alone, her jaw set. If the treason charge fell, it would fall on her and her alone. She would not drag another soul into this. She picked up her shovel and started to dig. And then she heard it. The scrape of another shovel against rock. Her head snapped up. There, further down the trench, barely visible in the gray light, was Ronan. He was back in his simple leather tunic, his sleeves rolled up, digging with a slow, steady rhythm. He looked like he hadn't slept. His face was drawn, his jaw clenched, and his eyes had a bruised, haunted quality that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He was defying his own counsel. He was committing treason. She approached him slowly. He didn't stop digging until she was standing right beside him. He finally looked up, his face grim. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "They'll throw you in your own dungeon." "Let them try," he said, his voice rough. He leaned on his shovel. "I will not let them starve you. I will not let them punish you for my failure. I will finish this myself if I have to." His wolf, for once, said nothing. It just sat inside him, quiet and certain, watching Wren's face with an ancient, patient stillness. No jokes, no backflips, just a low, steady thrum that said, "This is where we belong." Ronan looked so utterly alone, so burdened. The weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, and he was here, in a ditch, for her people. Wren felt the walls she'd built, the ones she'd reinforced last night in the dark, the ones she'd been building since her father walked out the door when she was 9, shake. Not crumble, not yet, but shake. And she let them. "You'll need help," she said softly. She walked to the tool pile where her own shovel lay abandoned. She picked it up. "It's my ditch after all. My ditch, my rules. And the first rule is, we finish what we start." He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. A slow, tired smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile without it being followed by a mortifying howl. "Your ditch, your rules," he agreed. Just then another figure appeared. It was Kale, holding a shovel. "If the king is committing treason, it's my job to be there to offer tactical advice," he said wryly. "And to tell him he's an idiot." Then another, Torvin the blacksmith, his face set like granite. Then Alara, then Maris. One by one, the people of Oakhaven emerged from the trees. They had seen their king defy the council for them, and they would not let him do it alone. They picked up their tools, the fear in their eyes replaced by a grim determination. They stood with Wren. They stood with their king. Work resumed, faster and more furious than ever before. It was no longer a protest. It was a revolution. They worked through the day and into the night, their way lit by torches. They were racing against the inevitable arrival of the council's enforcers. The air was electric with purpose and dread. But the mountain itself had other ideas. It happened near midnight. They were laying the final section of the channel near the mountain's base, where the old spring emerged from the rock face. The ground here was different, softer, saturated from the underground water table. Wren had noted the instability, but they'd shored it up with timber bracings. It should have held. It didn't. The collapse was sudden and thunderous. A section of the hillside above the channel gave way, a cascade of mud and rock sliding down into the trench with a roar like a living thing. Torches tumbled and hissed out. Screams cut through the darkness.
Wren was thrown sideways by the force of the slide, hitting the opposite wall of the trench hard enough to see stars. She was on her feet in seconds, ears ringing, spitting dirt. "Who's in the trench?" she screamed. "Sound off! Who's in the trench?" Names came back in the darkness, coughing and frightened. All but two. "Torvin!" Wren shouted. "Ilara!" Silence. Then a muffled, terrified voice from under the slide. "Wren, Torvin's here. He's not moving. I can't. There's a beam on his leg. I can't lift it." Ilara. Alive. Trapped. Wren was already scrambling toward the collapse, clawing at the rubble with her bare hands. Others rushed to help, but the slide was massive, a churning wall of mud and stone. Then Ronan was beside her. Not beside her, ahead of her. He plunged into the debris without hesitation, tearing through rocks and mud with a ferocity that was no longer human. His eyes burned solid gold in the torchlight. His wolf was at the surface now, not lovesick, not comedic, desperate, primal. "Here!" Alara's voice came from somewhere deep in the slide. "Please, hurry! He's not breathing right!" Ronan found them. Alara was curled in a pocket of space created by a fallen timber, shielded from the worst of the collapse. Torvin lay beside her, unconscious, a massive beam pinning his right leg at a terrible angle. Ronan wrapped his hands around the beam. It was oak, a foot thick, buried under hundreds of pounds of rubble. He pulled. The beam groaned but didn't move. He reset his grip, planted his feet, and pulled again with everything he had. A sound ripped from his chest. Not a howl this time, but something older and more raw. The sound of a wolf defending its pack. The beam shifted. Torvin screamed, which meant he was conscious, which meant he was alive. Wren was there instantly, dragging the blacksmith free while Ronan held the beam. Alara scrambled out after. Ronan released the beam and it crashed down with a finality that made the ground shake. He stood swaying in the wreckage, his hands torn and bleeding, his chest heaving. Torvin was conscious but gray with pain. His right leg was badly broken, the bone clearly shattered beneath the knee. Maris, who had some skill with healing herbs, was at his side in seconds, her face grim. "He needs a proper healer," Maris said, her voice tight. "And he won't walk on this leg for months. Maybe never the same." The words fell like stones. Torvin, the man-mountain, the first one to pick up a shovel, looked at his mangled leg and then at Wren. The pain in his eyes was terrible, but it wasn't just physical. "Don't you dare stop," he rasped, grabbing Wren's wrist. "Don't you dare stop because of me. My grandfather would never forgive me." Wren couldn't speak. She knelt beside him, holding his massive hand in both of hers, and for the first time since this all began, she cried. Not loudly, just silent tears cutting tracks through the mud on her face. Ronan stood apart, watching. His hands were still bleeding. His wolf was silent and still inside him. The giddiness burned away entirely. It just said quietly, "Help them." He knelt on Torvin's other side. "I will see to it that you receive the finest healers in the kingdom," he said, his voice steady. "This is my promise. On my blood." Torvin looked at the king, mud-caked, bleeding, exhausted, and nodded. "I believe you," he said simply. It was the highest compliment Ronan had ever received. They carried Torvin out on an improvised stretcher. The mood was subdued, shaken. Some of the villagers looked at the collapsed section, at the work still ahead, and despair crept back into their eyes. But Wren stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the tear tracks into the mud. Her voice, when she spoke, was raw but unwavering. "We clear the collapse," she said. "We rebuild the bracing. And we finish. For Torvin, for Oakhaven,
for every person who put a shovel in the ground because they believed this was worth fighting for. She picked up her shovel again. Ronan picked up his. And the work resumed, quieter now, but with a determination that was beyond anger or hope. It was something harder, something that had been tested and hadn't broken. By the time dawn painted the sky in streaks of pale gold, they had cleared the collapse and reinforced the damaged section with double the bracing. They had also finished the final stretch of the channel. The last stones were being laid into the sluice gate when the lookout's shout pierced the morning air. "Riders! 12 of them! And they're not the royal guard." Tiberius. He had come himself, flanked by his own loyalists, 12 wolves loyal to the council alone, older fighters who had served the elders for decades. They thundered down the valley road on black horses, cloaks billowing, a decree in Tiberius's fist. The elder dismounted at the edge of the reservoir, his ancient face livid with rage. His gaze swept the scene, the filthy, exhausted villagers, the royal guard standing shoulder to shoulder with commoners, the Alpha King, covered in mud and blood, standing in a ditch with a shovel. "What is the meaning of this?" Tiberius roared. "This is treason, Ronan, open, flagrant treason. You defy the council. You defy the ancient laws." "No," Ronan said, climbing out of the trench. His voice was calm and clear, carrying over the crowd. "This is leadership, something you've forgotten the meaning of." He was exhausted. He was bleeding. He had never looked more like a king. Tiberius's face contorted. He turned to his riders. "Arrest them. Arrest them all, starting with the commoner woman. Charge her with sedition, treason, and unlawful diversion of 'you will not touch her.'" Ronan's voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a politician, a diplomat, a man navigating centuries of tradition. It was the voice of the wolf. It was the sound of mountains moving and forests burning and ancient things waking up in the dark. It pressed down on every wolf present like a physical weight, an assertion of dominance so absolute that Tiberius's own riders flinched, their horses skittering sideways. Tiberius held his ground, but his hands were shaking. "You cannot overrule the council. The ancient laws," Ronan said, stepping forward, "state that the Alpha King may dissolve the Council of Elders in the event that said council fails in its fundamental duty to protect the welfare of the pack." His voice was quiet now, almost gentle, the silence of a blade being drawn. "I know the laws, Tiberius. All of them, including the ones you hoped I'd forgotten." Tiberius went still. "Article 17 of the Founding Covenant," Ronan continued, his eyes locked on the elder. Subsection 3. Should the council, through action or deliberate inaction, cause or permit grievous harm to the people of the realm, the Alpha Sovereign retains the irrevocable right to dissolve said council and reconstitute governance as the crisis demands. You sealed the reserves while children went thirsty. You threatened treason charges against people for digging a ditch to survive. You have failed the pack, and every wolf here knows it. He looked around at the crowd, villagers, guards, even some of Tiberius's own riders, whose faces had gone uncertain. "I am invoking Article 17, Ronan said, and his voice rang across the valley. "The Council of Elders is dissolved, effective immediately. By the authority of the Alpha bloodline and the founding covenant that you claim to serve." Tiberius staggered as if struck. You can't. The council has stood for 1,000 years, and for 1,000 years its purpose was to serve the people, not to hoard power like dragons sitting on gold while the kingdom starved. Ronan's gaze was steady, implacable. "You chose your traditions over your pack, Tiberius. I am choosing my pack over your traditions." A murmur rippled through the crowd, then a growl, low, rolling, spreading from wolf to wolf like thunder building. It wasn't just from Ronan. It came from Kale, from the royal guard, from the village wolves. It was the sound of a pack finding its voice. One of Tiberius's riders dismounted, slowly and deliberately, and walked to stand behind Ronan. Then another, then a third. Tiberius looked at his diminishing escort, at the sea of faces aligned against him, and for the first time in a century, the ancient wolf looked old. Not powerful old, just old. A fossil who had finally realized the world had moved on. "This isn't over," Tiberius said, but the fire had gone out of his voice. "Yes," Ronan said quietly, "it is." The old wolf turned his horse and rode away. The 3 riders who remained loyal to him followed, their departure swallowed by the dust of the valley road. No one cheered. Not yet. The moment was too heavy for cheering. Then Ren stepped forward. She looked at Ronan, searching his face. He met her gaze, and for once there was nothing hidden in it. No kingly mask, no political calculation. Just a bone-tired man who had just burned his world down because it was the right thing to do. "Let the water flow," he said to her, just to her. His voice cracked on the last word. Ren nodded. She turned and ran to the main sluice gate they had constructed at the top of the channel. Her hands were shaking, from exhaustion, from adrenaline, from something she still couldn't name. She gripped the gate mechanism. She thought of Torvin, who would never swing a hammer the same way again. She thought of Maris's daughter. She thought of the cracked earth and the empty wells and the months of rage that had brought her here. She heaved. For a moment, nothing happened. The mechanism groaned, rusted and stiff. Then Alara was beside her, grabbing the other side. Then Kale. Then 2 guards. Then a dozen villagers. Together, they pulled. The gate shrieked open. A trickle. Then a gush. Then a roar. The water from the mountain spring, cool and clear and life-giving, surged down the stone channel they had built with their own hands. It poured over the repaired collapse section, the section stained with Torvin's blood, and flowed down the valley like a living silver thing. It hit the reservoir with a sound like the whole world exhaling. Now they cheered. The sound was enormous, shaking the trees, scattering birds into the brightening sky. People were laughing, crying, splashing in the shallows, cupping water in their hands and just holding it, feeling it, real and cold and here. Maris was on her knees by the reservoir's edge, weeping openly, filling a bucket for her daughter. Alara grabbed Ren in a bear hug so fierce it lifted her off the ground. "You built a river," she said into Ren's hair. "You absolute lunatic, you built a river." Ren was laughing and crying at the same time, which was a terrible combination that resulted in a sound rather like a distressed goose, but she didn't care. Then the crowd seemed to part, or maybe she just stopped seeing anyone else, because Ronan was there. The torchlight and the early dawn caught his face and turned it half gold, half shadow. His hands were still torn and bleeding. There was a gash on his temple from the collapse that he hadn't bothered to address. His eyes were bright with something that wasn't the wolf's gold. It was just him. "Ren," he began, his voice rough with emotion. He looked like he was about to say something important, something rehearsed. Then he seemed to give up. "My wolf," he said, a wry, self-deprecating smile on his face. "He recognized you the moment you threw that bread at my head. He decided you were our mate. I told him he was an idiot." Her heart did a strange little flip. She said nothing, just watched his face. "I've spent weeks trying to prove him wrong," Ronan continued, his gaze unwavering. "I tried to be the king. I tried to follow the rules. I tried to ignore this pull I feel every time you're near. I tried to convince myself that my wolf was just a sentimental fool." He paused, and the wryness faded from his face, replaced by something raw and undefended. "But he's not an idiot. He's just more honest than I am. He knew from the beginning what it's taken me all this time to understand. That my mate wouldn't be some simpering, agreeable lady of the court. She would be fierce and stubborn, and she would have more fire in her soul than anyone I'd ever met. She would challenge me. She would make me better. She would throw bread at my head when I deserved it." He reached out, his calloused, dirt-stained hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, hesitant. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "You don't owe me anything because I picked up a shovel or faced down a council. That was the right thing to do, and I should have done it sooner. I'm just telling you the truth, because you deserve the truth." A laugh bubbled up in Ren's throat, half sob, half giggle. "It was a stale role," she whispered. "It was a declaration," he whispered back. He started to lean in, and Ren put her hand on his chest and stopped him. He froze. His eyes searched hers, and she saw the fear there, the sudden, terrible fear that he had misread everything, that the ditch and the shovel and the howl had meant nothing. "Wait," she said. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was trying to crack her ribs from the inside. "I need you to hear me first." He waited. He didn't drop his hand from her cheek, but he didn't push. "I have spent my entire life fixing things," Ren said. "Broken roofs, broken wells, broken people's hopes. I fix things because that's what I can control. I can't control whether people stay. I can't control whether promises mean anything." She swallowed. "My father made a lot of promises. He had warm eyes too. He left before the first frost and never came back." Ronan's thumb stilled on her cheekbone. His expression shifted, not pity, not guilt, something deeper, recognition. "I am terrified of you," Ren said, and the admission cost her more than any bread roll, more than any speech from a crate. "Not because you're the king, because you showed up in my ditch and you stayed. And you made me want to believe that people can do that. And if I let myself believe that, and you go back to your palace and become the man on the balcony again," her voice cracked, "I won't survive it. Not because I'm weak, because I will have been stupid, and that's worse." The silence between them was the most honest thing either of them had ever shared. Ronan took a breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, he removed his hand from her face. He took a step back, and he knelt. Not a courtly kneel, not a graceful genuflection. He knelt in the mud, his ruined hands on his thighs, and looked up at her. The Alpha King, on his knees, in front of everyone. "I am not your father," he said. His voice was raw, stripped of everything except truth. "I am a man who stood on a balcony and failed you. And I will carry that for the rest of my life. I don't have a perfect record. I have a bread-shaped bruise, and a council I just dissolved, and a wolf who composes sonnets about the way you hold a shovel." A wet laugh escaped her. "But I am not going back to the balcony. If I have to sleep in this ditch for the rest of my days to prove it, I will. This is not a promise that I'll be perfect. It is a promise that I will stay. And if I ever forget what matters, you have my full permission to hit me with another bread roll. A fresh one if you like. I hear they're aerodynamically superior." Ren stared down at him. The king, in the mud, making terrible jokes with blood on his hands and hope in his eyes. Her walls didn't crumble. That wasn't how it worked, not for people like Ren. They loosened. They developed a door, and she, terrified and furious and full of a feeling she was only just allowing herself to name, opened it. She reached down, grabbed him by the front of his filthy tunic, and hauled him to his feet with a strength that surprised them both. "Get up," she said. "Kings don't kneel in ditches." "This one does," he said. "Apparently." She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was the kiss of a woman who had made a decision and was going to commit to it with the same ferocity she brought to everything else. It was a little desperate and a lot muddy, and it tasted like dust and tears and the beginning of something that scared her half to death. Ronan made a sound against her mouth that was equal parts relief and disbelief, and then his arms were around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with 3 centuries of loneliness and a wolf who was internally detonating with joy. The crowd, who had been holding their collective breath, erupted. The cheer this time was different, warmer, wilder, full of the giddy energy of people who had just witnessed something rare and real and slightly ridiculous. Cale, watching from a distance, allowed himself a small, tired smile. Ronan pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. He was shaking slightly. "My wolf wants to howl right now," he murmured. "I am holding him back with every fiber of my being." "If you howl," Ren said, "I will push you into the reservoir." "Fair." "I mean it." "I know." He kissed her again, softer this time, slower, and his wolf, in an unprecedented display of self-control, managed to express its joy as merely a very loud purr that vibrated through both of them. The aftermath was not swift, it was not clean, and it was not a fairy tale. Torvin's leg healed, but it healed wrong. The finest healers in the kingdom, sent by Ronan within hours of his promise, saved the limb. But the blacksmith who had swung a hammer like a god would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. On the day he first stood again, leaning on a cane Elara had carved for him, he looked at the aqueduct and said, "Worth it." But Ren saw the way his hand trembled on the cane, and she carried that weight quietly, a stone in her chest that never fully dissolved. The council's dissolution sent shockwaves through the kingdom. Not everyone was grateful. The old noble families, who had benefited from centuries of the elders' favoritism, pushed back. There were tense weeks of negotiation, threats, and one attempted coup so poorly planned that Cale described it as an insult to the very concept of treason. Ronan navigated it all with a patience Ren hadn't known he possessed. A new council was formed, comprised not of ancient, dusty nobles, but of practical, proven leaders from all the territories: blacksmiths, farmers, engineers. Torvin, seated with his bad leg propped on a cushion, was given a place of honor. And its head, appointed by the king, was Ren. "You can't be serious," she said when he told her, standing in the council chamber that still smelled of Tiberius's fossilized opinions. "I'm a dirt farmer who throws bread." "You're the woman who built a river because her king failed her," Ronan said. "I can't think of anyone better qualified to make sure a king never fails his people again." Her first act was to draft a new set of laws regarding the national reserves, ensuring that they would be used for the people, not hoarded as a political tool. Her second act was to completely overhaul the kingdom's tax code, a process so grueling and argument-filled that 3 scribes quit and one was found hiding in a supply closet. Ronan found that his duties as king now mostly involved sitting in on council meetings, where Ren would argue passionately about agricultural tariffs, while his wolf purred so loudly he had to pretend he had a persistent chest cold. Life was chaotic. Ren still had a sharp tongue and an unimpressed glare for anyone who spouted nonsense, which included Ronan on a fairly regular basis. Their arguments were legendary, passionate, loud, and deeply entertaining for the palace staff, who started placing bets on outcomes. But now, their arguments ended with them working side by side to solve the problem, and occasionally with Ren stealing a kiss mid-sentence, which Ronan considered an unfair debate tactic, but was not inclined to discourage. She still had bad days, days when the walls tried to rebuild themselves, when she'd go quiet and unreachable and dig in the palace garden until her hands were raw. Ronan learned to sit beside her on those days, not speaking, not fixing, just staying. His wolf would lie still inside him, a warm, patient presence. "We are here," it would say. "We are not going anywhere." And eventually, Ren would lean her shoulder against his, and the walls would loosen again. One evening, months later, they stood on the balcony where it had all begun. Oakhaven's aqueduct was a gleaming silver line in the distance, a permanent landmark. The kingdom was healing. Not healed, healing. There was a difference, and Ren, who fixed things for a living, understood that some things took time. "You know," Ren said, leaning against him as they watched the sunset, "I still think you're a little bit of an idiot." Ronan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He nuzzled into her hair, inhaling the scent of righteous anger and yeast that he had come to love. "I know," he said, his voice content. But I'm your idiot. His wolf, for once in perfect agreement with his human half, wagged its tail. Our idiot, it corrected, purring loud enough to vibrate through them both. And we have the best mate in the entire world. She built us a river. She is magnificent. We will never deserve her. For once, Ronan thought, I agree with you completely. And in the quiet of the evening, with the scars of their impossible victory written on the land and on their bodies, with a kingdom that was messy and imperfect and stubbornly, defiantly alive, it was more than enough.